and welcome to our webinar. Today, we'll walk you through how to turn complex, distributed, and large amounts of data stored in SharePoint into real-time insights using Power BI or direct SQL queries. But we'll also show you how you can easily feed this data to an AI model, be it Copilot or any other implementation, so that you can query this large data set using a natural language. My name is Francesco Marcolini. I am the founder and CEO of AxioWorks. We created SQList, which is our SharePoint-to-SQL Server synchronization tool, which is at the core of the solution we will discuss today. I'm very, very pleased to be joined by Microsoft MVP Knut Relbe-Moe for this webinar. Knut, I'll hand it over to you to introduce yourself.
Thank you so much, Francesco, and thank you for having me, and looking forward to hear all the amazing insights that we will share about how we can work with complex data inside of Power BI and everything going in from SharePoint. So happy to be here, being a Microsoft MVP for 10 years and hopefully 11 this summer, and of course know you for quite some time already. So it's great to be here and look forward to hear all your insights. And thank you everyone for joining, and feel free to post any questions that you might have for Francesco in the chat, and I will ask him all of those in the end of the webinar. So if you have any questions during the presentation, then feel free to drop them in, and I will make sure that we will get to ask them live to our amazing speaker, Francesco. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Knut. Really great to have you. Okay, let's go. So before we dive into the details, let's go to a quick summary of what today's webinar will cover. We're going to show you how to build real-time cross-site queries and reports on SharePoint data using Power BI, but also direct SQL queries for those more technical of you, but also natural language queries powered by AI, which is the way everything seems to be going these days. You will see a live demonstration of a working solution based on a realistic multi-site SharePoint setup. It includes quite large lists, hundreds of thousands of items. And we show you how changes made in SharePoint are reflected almost immediately in the reports and the queries. This session is ideal for BI analysts, data professionals, or decision makers who have a lot of data stored in SharePoint, but struggle to extract powerful and responsive and complex insight due to the limitation of SharePoint. So, okay, everyone sit back and we hope you'll enjoy it. A quick look at today's agenda. We plan to take 30 to 40 minutes. We will begin with a brief overview of SQList to explain what it does and how it fits into the overall solution. Then we'll walk you through a realistic multi-site SharePoint structure made of a central site and several regional subsites that are connected to each other. From there, we'll look at how we can bring the data from all these sites into a SQL Server as a unified database, including the large list with hundreds of thousands of items. And next, we'll demonstrate live Power BI dashboards that reflect changes made in SharePoint in real time, without the need of a manual import of all the data or schedule imports into Power BI. We'll also show how you can easily feed this data to an AI model and use a natural language to explore your data. Again, also in this case, with the model showing real-time updates. Then we will briefly cover how this solution is currently used in real-world scenarios by some of our customers across a few industries. And finally, we will have a Q&A session. So as also Knut said, please feel free to put your questions in the chat, and we will pick up as many as we can at the end. So let's start with a quick look at what SQList actually is. Okay. So we all have data stored in SharePoint, whether in out-of-the-box lists, Microsoft lists, or any other application that store data in SharePoint. SharePoint is a fantastic tool to manage your data with its workflows, permissions, validations, and all the additional plugins that you can put on top of it. But it also has some serious limitations when it comes to querying this data. namely the 5,000 item limit when you want to retrieve list, throttling when you put too many queries in, slow performance in general because of the way SharePoint is built. And also, it does not allow queries across multiple lists, especially across lists across multiple sites. So what have we done? We built SQList, which synchronizes SharePoint lists into SQL Server tables and keep them continuously in sync. So any change made in SharePoint is automatically and in near real time replicated to these SQL Server tables. Once the data is in SQL Server, we can query the data the way we need. The advantage what is that being SQL Server a database, there are no limitation to the amount of queries and joins and data that you can pull together. You have fast performance being that a relational database, but also you have total connectivity as virtually any BI tools or reporting tools can connect natively to SQL Server. And the additional advantage is that you don't need to purchase additional connectors or additional licenses in order to actually connect to this data. SQList runs in the background, and once it's configured, it doesn't require any intervention anymore because it runs in the background and keeps your data in sync continuously. So now let's take a look at the SharePoint site that we are going to use. For this demo, we are going to demonstrate a realistic scenario, and we base this demo on a typical SharePoint architecture using by some of our clients. At the top level, we have a site called Contoso Global, which contains central lists such as region, countries, categories, products. These lists are reference or lookup for the rest of the organizations. Then we created some subsites for every region. Here we created 4 for Americas, APAC, EMEA, and UK, each of which manages their own operational data, including customers, sales, and targets. The key point here is that the regional lists contain lookup columns pointing back to the global lists. This is a very, very common in structured SharePoint environments, but become problematic when you try to query this data and link this data across multiple sites, due specifically to the lack of a native cross-site query supporting in SharePoint. Each of these regional sites contains a few lists. Some of them, as I mentioned earlier, they are quite large, so between 100,000 to 500,000 items. So we are working at a scale that usually start putting some problem when trying to query this data directly from SharePoint. And this is where SQList becomes essential. So let's see what these sites look in practice. I'm gonna switch over to SharePoint. And here we are. So here we have the Contoso global site. This is the root site with the global lists. You can see that they are here. These are just some simple lists that we're gonna use for lookups in the regional sites. And then we have 4 subsites that they all look the same. For example, this is the regional site for DMA. We can see that we have a list with customers, a list of sales, and a list of targets. One thing to point out is this list of sales. You can see here, this particular one has over 500,000 items. The list of sales connects through lookups to the customers list in the site itself, but also to list on the sales channels and products on the master site. The other sites are all created the same, again with the sale list being the large one. We'll be talking about again 100,000, around the 100,000 or plus items. In this system, we have SQList running, and it is keeping this data directly in sync into a local SQL Server database. So in here now, we can go and take a look at the database so that we see exactly what you get out of the product. So SharePoint is here. There we go. So this is a database. This is local version of an on-prem version of SQL Server, but we could very well use also an online SharePoint Online, SQL Server Azure, sorry. In here, we can see the global lists have been replicated as a set of table with the prefix of global. And here, for every region, we have the lists replicated as separate tables. You can see here the row count that contains all the hundreds of thousands of items we would mention earlier. So this live is live. This data is live, which means that if I update data in SharePoint, this data will be automatically be reflected into this table. I will show you later an example of this. But some important things to notice is first, now that the data is kept in sync on SQL Server, you can easily run some very powerful query across all this data. For example, having here a query that when I execute it, I get the total of a sale for every region and for every year. Likewise, I have one here just as another example of a bit more detailed query, which shows you the total for every country, for every year, for every month. You can see that very quickly you can retrieve this data now without having any delay or any problems with thresholds or limits. Just to give you an idea of how many sales we're dealing with here, if you look at the total sales here, we're talking about over 800,000 sales, so items retrieved from SharePoint. And we have this data live. Now, the important thing here is that we can now connect BI tools to this data and run powerful reporting on them. And we are going to see an example in Power BI. So let me switch over to Power BI. I have here a simple dashboard. This dashboard here is showing the totals per country and per year of all the sales. Again, as I said earlier, these are live updates. You can see that when I refresh, it takes a fraction of a second to refresh the charts because because the data is in SQL Server, I'm able to use what's called a direct query in Power BI. So I don't need to import all the data again in Power BI before I can refresh the data. Now, from here, one thing we can notice, going back to the live update in SharePoint being automatically replicated, we can see here, for example, that in Canada, we haven't done any sales in 2021 over here. Okay, so what I'm going to do now, I'm going to create a sales in SharePoint and then see how this data is automatically become available to the chart in just a few seconds. So I'm going to switch back to the SharePoint site. I'm going to the Americas, I'm actually already here. This is where Canada is. And I'm going to go into the sales list. I'm going to just create a new item. I'm going to call it a test sale. A date, I'm going to put any date, but I'm going to change the year to 2021. The product doesn't matter, not the quantity. The amount, I'm going to put a big amount so that we can actually see a nice bar on the SharePoint, on the Power BI report. And then the customer, we select this one, which I know for a fact that this is a customer that is in Canada. And I save this sale here. Now, this sale here is being saved in SharePoint. SQList is in the background, and it will now bring those sales, those data to the database. If I now refresh the database, it will probably take only a few seconds. There we go. You can see that now we have 25 million of sales to Canada in real time. Likewise, if instead you run your queries in SQL Server, you can go here. If we run again the same query that I showed you earlier, you can see here that now in Americas in 2021, we have our 25 million. So across all the platforms, now you have your data up to date. If, of course, I go into here and I delete this, oops, pardon, I clicked the wrong link. If I go in here and I delete this item, exactly like it happened before. Like when I refresh the SharePoint, the Power BI report, you give it just a few seconds, and then you will see that the report gets updated. And there we go. Here we go. You see the SharePoint now is up to date. And just to finish the proof, I can rerun this SQL query here, and you can see that the 2021 for the Americas is gone. Okay.
That is pretty awesome, Francesco, and so quick and so responsive. It's like amazing.
Yes. In fact, the powerful part of this is that SQList is built to be first very lightweight, but also put very, very little pressure on the SharePoint side. So what it does, it only detects changes. And that is why it can be so quick in updating data, even if we're talking about millions of items, because it does only the deltas. And so it can very quickly update the data and refresh them. Now, the next step is we can also, once this data is in SQL Server, we can use Power BI, we can use all our BI tool. The thing that now is happening nowadays is using AI. So what can we do? We can feed this data to an AI model. Now, for this demo, I'm going to use a quick implementation that I did with OpenAI. But in the same way, you can feed the same data to a Copilot or to any other AI model. What is the advantage here? That we can use a very simple natural language to query the data that you have in your database. So, for example, I have a question here that I can ask is, let me just copy and paste, because if I type it, I'm sure that it's going to take ages. What was the total sales to EMA region in 2024, for example? Now you give it to that, and you will see that the system is going to go and query the live data, and we tell us we have 948 million of sales, which we can actually compare to our database query. And in the EMA, you can see here, 2024, that is the number. So the AI was able to retrieve this data directly from the database. But because the database is kept in sync, now I show you how you can actually query live updates. So let's go back to Canada. Now, I deleted the sale to Canada earlier. So if I now ask this question, what was the total sales to Canada in 2021? And I ask the model, it says that there is no data. The answer is a little bit long, but basically what it says is that there are no data in Canada. So let's put back in a second that sales to Canada. So I can go here and I put test sale again, and I put 2021 again, and I just basically put exactly what I put earlier. And then this one, and then we select a customer from Canada and we save it. Now, just like before, the data is going to be updated behind the scene. And let's just make sure that the update has gone through. We just refresh the database, the report until, there we go. We can see that the data has already been refreshed. Now, the interesting thing is, let's go and ask the AI the same question. There we go. So now we ask the same question, and we can see that the update made in SharePoint is automatically immediately available to the AI model. Now, this is a very simple things, but a technology like this can be easily used, for example, to an internal bot that you can give internally to your employees to query data about data in your database, or a bot that does customer support, for example. You could query customers' data and reply to customers. I mean, the possibilities are endless.
So with that, Francesco, can I ask a question?
Yes, of course.
So here you have an AI solution. Does that mean that we can also get this to integrate with Copilot from Microsoft?
Absolutely. As I said earlier, me being more a developer, it was quicker for me to put something together and use AI because I like the low-level stuff. But Copilot allows you to create something very, very similar, if actually much better. The only difference is, my understanding is that you will not be able to use data in a on-prem SQL Server, but you would have to use it on a SQL Azure with SQList, which SQList supports fully. So instead of replicating your data to a local or an on-prem SQL, you replicate it to a SQL Azure, and then with Copilot and Power Platform and everything, you will be able to access this data and do actually a much better solution than this, I'm sure.
Nice, that's great. So that means that everybody that is on the Copilot train basically can also use and benefit from your product as well.
Absolutely. Also because there seems to be a lot of focus on using AI for unstructured data, which is obviously probably incredibly useful because those are the most difficult ones to query. But there is a huge value in actually providing structured data to the AI so that you actually have access also to this data, not just using dashboards or queries, but also using natural language.
Great. I'm really excited to hear about that, and I'm really sure that there will be some customers soon they're going to test it out in their environments. So that's great.
Okay. Now, just to continue, basically, one thing I would like to say, this is basically an overview of the whole system. It's actually very simple. I didn't want to go too technical on purpose. I just wanted to focus on how just connecting these few pieces, you can actually get some very powerful solutions. I would like just to mention a few cases that are actually real world scenarios where these solutions are actually used, and actually they are our current customers. I'm going to bring up just three of the main industries where this solution is used. Pharmaceutical, we have a customers that basically when they create a new medicine, they need to run some tests for these medicines. And so for every test, they create a subsite. Once they create the subsites, they need to query this data across tests so that they can have, I don't know, trend data or compare different results and everything. And they use SQList exactly in the way I just shown you. They export everything in one single database, and then they are able to query data across all the trials. One interesting thing is also that being a pharmaceutical company, they are extremely strict with security, and the SQList fits right in because SQList runs in your own environment, and you can actually make it very secure in the way that what it can connect. Another example is project management, where we have one of our customers has thousands of projects. Actually, we're talking about very, very large customers, and we're talking about a lot of sites. And they create a site for every project. Every site contains more or less the same list, which are going to be resources and tasks and jobs and anything that needs to be in the project. And using SQList, they are able to export everything in one big database and then run query on to analyze progress across sites, to analyze resource across projects, and all these kind of things. And finally, I brought up an oil and a gas example, which is basically, in this case, they have many rigs, platform basically. And each one has an enormous amount of documents that they need to handle because in the oil and gas industry, they have enormous amount of documents for compliance and security and documentation and stuff. And they need to be able to find this documentation very quickly. And so using SQList in a similar way we just done, they are able to export all their document libraries into one database and run searches across all these lists and find all the documents that they want that are scattered across multiple sites. And there are many more examples, but these are just the main ones that that I thought would be useful.
Yeah, and I see that you support both basically to have the data in a sub-site or in a site collection, basically. So is it any difference from SQList where or how you do kind of the site architecture in SharePoint?
Yeah, no, okay, both are supported. Nowadays, the best practice seems to be best practice put by Microsoft, and correct me, Knut, if I'm wrong, seems to be to avoid subsites but create site collections. But SQList works exactly the same way. So in the same way that you can export a subsite, you can export a site from a site collection. In fact, you can use SQList to export data from different versions of SharePoint in case you have some more recent sites on SharePoint Online, and then you have some sites on a legacy on-prem SharePoint, for example. You could bring everything together in one database and still use the database as a unified view across all this data.
Yeah, and it's totally correct what you say, that best practice right now from Microsoft, of course, is to create separate site collection from permission reasons and all other type of reasons. But it's great to know that you support both scenarios, because I'm pretty sure that there are still a lot of users out there that has a lot of subsites, basically, to where they have like a lot of data, and then it's good to know that for SQList, it doesn't matter if you choose A or if you choose B. So that's great.
It works exactly in the same way that I showed here. And this actually brings us to the end of the presentation. First of all, I would like to say thank you to everyone for attending, and let's take a look whether there are any questions.
Yeah, I have a few questions, Francesco, for you. So if you're ready, let's go.
Fire away.
So does SQList export multi-lookup columns?
Multi-lookups, yes. Very good questions. The answer is absolutely yes, and also in a perfectly normalized structure. So SQList export the lists into a normalized structure of tables. So all single lookups are exported as a foreign key on the main item of the table. Multi-lookups are exported as separate many-to-many tables with the ID of the main item and the ID of the lookup item. For every multi-lookup column, SQList creates and maintains this table of the two items, so that you can actually do the proper joins between the lists.
That is amazing. That is great news. So thank you for the great answer. And another one would be, can SQList export document libraries?
Document library, yes. Document libraries can be exported just as normal lists. So because document libraries usually comes with a lot of metadata attached to them, and those are actually usually the important bit, SQList export them just like any other list. There is an additional thing that you can do. You can also, if you want, download the actual document and store it in SQL Server as a blob. And that is useful if you would like, for example, to serve this document from a different system, for example, a website, without having to give access all the way to SharePoint. So yes, the answer is yes, and with the additional advantage of being able to access also the actual documents.
Great. And then I have a couple of more questions as well. So, but let's take the first. Does SQList run in the cloud, or how does it run with regards of for the customers? Like if they want to get to start to use SQList, like where is it installed, and how does it work?
Yes. Okay, SQList is a Windows application. Technically speaking, the one that does the job is a Windows service, so it needs to be installed on a Windows machine. If your infrastructure is fully on the cloud, you can very simply use a VM and install it on a VM and then run it in your cloud infrastructure. The advantage of this type of installation is that makes SQList extremely secure, because you are able to control completely what SQList can connect to and what can write to. In fact, SQList doesn't even need internet connection. You can run it in a fully isolated sandbox, and SQList will work just fine. And that for certain companies, like the pharmaceutical company I mentioned earlier, is absolutely a must because they will never allow their data to go outside of their network.
Yeah, I also have worked with a few customers that are still local and even on-prem and so on. So I totally get that in some certain specific reason, then it's always good to basically have it running in a isolated instance. Another one from that we just got in from an attendee here as well. In the example, what Power BI connector to SharePoint do you use? SharePoint Online list, or can you please show first lines of advanced editor in Power Query, like from your Power BI dashboard?
Okay. In the example that I showed, I'm actually not connected to SharePoint at all. In the example that I shown, I'm connecting to SQL Server, and that is the advantage. Because SQList brings your data from SharePoint to SQL Server, at that point, you don't need anymore to connect all the way back to SharePoint. But you connect to SQL Server, and Power BI has connects natively. You don't need any connector to connect to SQL Server.
Yeah, and of course, also the plus with that is that then you can do the advanced queries and you don't get the limits with the 5,000 elements and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, yeah. Yes, and you have the direct query also. So you don't need to import all the data. You can actually use direct query and always have the live data from the SharePoint from directly on the Power BI.
Could you maybe show that, Francesco? Is that possible?
Yes, I can go back to where we were earlier, but basically, if we go to Power BI here, you can see that here, what I've done, I connected to two views that I have here in SQL Server. If we go into views, you see that I have sales by country.
Yeah.
When I look at this view, all it does is do the joins similar to what I've shown you earlier, you see. What is the advantage? Instead of importing the country list and the region list and the sales list and the customer list and do the joins in Power BI and import all the data, I created a view in SQL Server. And that what does it mean? First, that all the heavy load of the joins and the queries is done in SQL Server, and only the results are returned to Power BI. So only a very little amount of data is returned, and that is how you can achieve these refresh times that are sub-seconds, really. You see, that's done. That is a refresh.
Yeah, this is like music in my ears and my eyes, because like not a lot of people know, but like before I started with SharePoint, I did a lot of database designs and wrote all these views and all the database designs basically. So I totally get it. I think this is like a magic in a sense, you know, because you don't need to do all the heavy lifting inside of Power BI. You basically just do it in the SQL Server. And so thank you so much for asking that question to our attendee. It's really one of the key points of SQList, in my opinion. So I have one more, unless there will be coming more in.
I think we are within our 45 minutes.
Yeah, so let's do one more and then see if they're coming in more from our attendees as well. So is SQList secure against data leaks?
Yes. Okay. Great questions. It's 100% secure because first, as I mentioned earlier, it runs in your environment and it uses standard connection to SharePoint and to SQL Server. So the first thing is that you have total control of what SQList can see. You can even configure it so that you can see only one list in one SharePoint site and it doesn't see anything else. The other one about data leaks is secure because the data is either in your SharePoint site or on your SQL Server database. There is no data stored in transit. So SQList doesn't, for example, download the data all in a temporary table and then do something and then push it over or store temporary data anywhere. The data goes directly from SharePoint to SQL Server. So even if the server crashes halfway through, there are no copies left around. So as long as your environment and your network is secure, SQList runs within it, and so it's absolutely secure.
That is great. And I see that we have an attendee that is writing another question. So let's wait for that one to come as well. Yeah, so is there a recent update that supports service principal connection to SQL Server instead of the SQL Server identity?
Yes, that is absolutely right. That was released in the last release that we done. And that is in order to be up to date with Microsoft. Microsoft now is slowly deprecating all what they call the legacy authentication systems, which are username and password, or even app ID and app secret. So all that is being deprecated. So we as well had to adapt and offer Azure AD application authentication, both on SharePoint and also on SQL Server. In fact, I think that probably the next or the one after, we are actually going to deprecate all those authentication methods as well.
Yeah, that is great. And of course, that's what we have to do when you're a product or a software company. You need to adapt with the current changes. So it's great.
We have to constantly update everything that comes out, unfortunately.
So it's great to hear that you are on par with that, on the ball, basically. So that is great. And of course, like when it comes to all of this stuff, you mentioned that it runs on a local machine. It's a VM, basically, probably then, if you want to do it in the cloud.
Yeah, a VM with do.
Yeah, and you also mentioned that it could be done within like an Azure table as well, or you have to have like a VM running.
I'm sorry, can you say that again, Knut? I missed
so do you want to like for instance, like could it run for instance without the VM? Basically, is it possible to have it to connect to like the Azure table storage instead of like just or the Azure SQL list instead of like the full VM, or you need to have a VM to operate SQList, basically?
No, SQList needs to be installed, and therefore you will need either a physical machine, but nobody uses those anymore, or a VM, because it needs to be installed. Then as database, you can run it, as long as it's SQL Azure, for example, you can run it in Azure, and that can be anywhere.
Perfect. No, that's great. And we have one last question as well that popped in. And then I think we are on end of our time. So if records are deleted from SQL, they will not go back upstream. Is that correct?
Yes, that is absolutely correct, actually. Okay, one thing to clarify, and maybe I can go back on the previous slide, is the SQList is a one-way only update. So just going back to the design, it only goes in this direction from SharePoint to SQL Server. The goal of SQList is not to allow you to update the data. It's only to give you full access to your SharePoint data without any other limitation. But you keep SharePoint in order to maintain and manage all your data. You still do it in SharePoint exactly as you do it. In fact, one advantage of SQList is that you don't actually need to install anything or enable anything in SharePoint. You keep using it exactly as you always have, but you can access the data from SQL Server.
Yeah, so basically, like you're not going to manipulate the data at all in the SQL Server. The delta is basically in SharePoint, and if you want to change things, you need to change it in SharePoint, and it will just be pushed over to SQL. That's great. That's a great clarification. Amazing question. So thank you for that. One. Great. I think that brings us to the end, Francesco. So and yeah, we have one more. If you offer a free trial.
Yes, absolutely. We offer a free trial. You can go to our SharePoint at AxioWorks.com. You can download a free trial. We can give live demos. Just contact us or download the trial on the website.
Perfect. That's great. Okay. So it's time to go and test it out and build some amazing, fast-looking dashboards in Power BI now, and you will see how it differs from the old ones, and you can impress your boss, basically. So that's great.
I can guarantee you will see a difference. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you again, Knut, for joining. It was great having you, especially knowing you as a Microsoft MVP and all the experience that you're having in the industry. It was really, really good to have you here, and I'm very glad that you actually could join this and give me also all your advice on the product. And unless there are other questions, I think we can close it.
Yeah, I think everybody is saying thank you and great presentation and great product. So I think that's good feedback to get as
Fantastic.
well. So thank you so much, Francesco, for having me. And yeah, we will keep in touch and let's see all the amazing feedback. And let's hope that a lot of people will come in and try a product. I can recommend it.
Thank you, Knut, and thank you everyone for joining. Goodbye.